Very good evening, everyone. As we know, the Physiological Society of India, it was established in 1934, 13 July. This year, basically, we are just going to celebrate our 92nd Foundation Day. So this year, we are celebrating this PSI Foundation Day throughout a week. So this is the fourth day of our lecture series. Basically, a part of this Foundation Day, we're organizing many things. That, and out of the things, one is the lecture series, and besides the lecture series, there is nationwide celebration of the same by organizing UG level seminar, and basically that's a part of competition. And the feedback, whatever we are receiving from the different colleges, medical colleges, basic science colleges, the UG students, they are celebrating much more. They're enjoying it very much. So this is a grand success. So I must express my sincere thank to all the team member, including those who are working directly. Here you can see here we have Professor Pashun Pionak, our president, who is actively participating in all the part. He is a leader of the Physiological Society of India. And for the lecture series, you can see Professor Shampa Sarkar, who is a key person in conducting or broadcasting all the happenings, what is going on in the online streaming in our YouTube. So thank you very much. And it's not possible for uttering all the names. I'm again thankful to all the team members for their tremendous effort and their support. So without wasting much more time, I just would like to introduce today's speaker. This is the fourth day. We have Professor Shushan Barman. So basically, it's a profound privilege to introduce a true titan in the field of physiological sciences, a trailblazer whose decades of groundbreaking research and visionary leadership have fundamentally reshaped our understanding of the human body. Please welcome Dr. Shushan M. Barman, University Distinguished Professor in the Department of Pharmacology and Toxicology at Michigan State University, USA. Dr. Barman is a globally recognized authority on the neural control of cardiovascular and respiratory function. For nearly 50 years, her pioneering research has sought to answer one of the most complex questions in medicine: how exactly does the brain control blood pressure? Her masterful work tracing the origin of rhythms in sympathetic nerve activity has earned her the prestigious National Institute of Health Merit Awards and celebrated Carl Ludwig Distinguished Leadership. Beyond her extraordinary laboratory contribution, Dr. Borman is a Dr. Barman is a monumental figure in global scientific governance. She has broken barriers throughout her career, notably serving as the president of the American Physiological Society. Her dedication to fostering the global scientific community is further reflected in her international collaboration, including her extensive work with the International Union of Physiological Sciences, that is IUPS, to advance physiology education worldwide, as well as her authorship of the world-renowned textbook, Cannon's Review of Medical Physiology. All we know it. It's a very famous book for the undergraduate and postgraduate students. Yet, if you ask her colleagues and former students, her greatest legacy might well be her fierce advocacy for women in biomedical sciences and her unwavering devotion to mentorship. In recognition of her exceptional impact on the career of countless emerging scientists, she was honored with the Bodil M. Smith Nelson Distinguished Mentor and Scientist Award. We are incredibly fortunate to have such an iconic scholar, educator, and leader with us today to share her immense wisdom. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in extending a warm, resounding welcome to the podium, Dr. Shushan M. Barman. Please, ma'am, it's
Thank you very much for that extremely kind introduction. I'd like to know that person that you described. She sounds like she's awesome. So it was great introduction. I appreciate that very much.
Thank you, ma'am.
All right. And so today, I'm not going to talk about my science. I'm going to talk about my passion for physiology and talk about the importance of physiology in really informing medicine and other biomedical sciences. And so I'm going to cover a few things here, but this is the idea of looking at physiology as the center. And it informs all these other disciplines: biochemistry, neuroscience, medicine, genetics. All of these are really impacted by physiology. And so in the course of today, I'm going to talk about several things. I'm going to talk about the history of physiology as a discipline. As a grad student, we always had to know the history of physiology. We were examined on it in our comprehensive exams and in our final exams. We had to know the history, because if you don't know the history, you might really make a lot of mistakes. So it's important. And then I'm going to talk about the history of the Nobel Prize. It's called Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine, not just medicine. It is physiology or medicine. And I'm going to talk about the relevance of physiology in medicine and other biomedical sciences. And I'm going to talk about challenges that face physiology. I'm going to focus on educators across the globe and things that are being done to address these challenges. And so first, going through that brief physiology, so tracing the development and understanding of human function. So I'm going to go way back in time, physiology in the Middle Ages. So at that time, the function of the body, which is physiology, was thought to be governed by what were called four humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. And these various humors were highly influenced by the environment and by changes in seasons and other fluctuations like that. And an imbalance would lead to sickness. And then you would treat this sickness by bloodletting, by cupping, and by purging. And they also understood that the heart was a really fundamental part of the human body, a really important part. It was considered the seat of the vital spirits and emotions. And it had connections to an understanding of that the idea somehow the pulse, your heart pulse, was important in diagnosing disease. So really the heart became a really important part. And then we're going to advance to the Renaissance ages. And here's where we introduce William Harvey, who was very critical in our understanding of blood circulation. So prior to his work, people were making decisions about the function of the body based on dissection of cadavers. But he began to do experimentation. He began to study actually things as they were living. And he demonstrated that the heart pumped blood into a closed circulation. Prior to that, the blood was just considered to be floating all over the body kind of thing, not in some circulatory system. Also, during the Renaissance ages, began to incorporate concepts of physics in physiology. But this makes sense. Mechanics and its role in muscle movement, and hydraulics in the role of blood flow. So really, this was a phase when experimentation became a standard for being able to understand function, transforming physiology into an experimental science instead of just making decisions based on anatomy. And so then we're going to move to the 18th and 19th century. So this was sometimes considered the birth of modern physiological sciences. And here, physiology became an independent science. It really became on its own. Became a science. And this was because of the development of things like microscopes and chymographs and electrical devices that allowed the experimenters to actually make measurements of physiological processes, like nerves being conducted and muscles contracting. And one of the biggest influencers of this century was Claude Bernard, and the introduction of this ever so important concept that's almost synonymous with the word physiology, the concept of homeostasis. And this was the idea of understanding that the idea is to keep a stable internal body environment. Your interior function has to stay healthy, it has to stay functional, despite the fact that it's getting bombarded by all of these external disturbances. So this was the idea of this concept of homeostasis. When something gets moved off of the basics, off of the homeostatic level, something else comes in to return it back down to that. And so this whole idea of negative feedback coming in to keep our body functioning normally. Also during this period of time, there were textbooks that actually were physiology textbooks rather than just basing things on structure. And chemistry became integrated into physiology in the study. I just lost my slide. Okay. Okay. It's back. And so this is when then we really began to study physiology in textbooks, and biochemistry was understood in the concept of metabolism and digestion by linking it to physiology. Then comes the 20th century, and this was the advancement of understanding, going from single cells all the way to systems. And so advances in electrophysiological techniques showed how neurons transmit signals and release chemicals to communicate. Prior to that, it was not known whether nerves were electrically conducting information across the synapse, or was it chemically conducting? And there was a great experiment showing it was chemical in the majority of cases. And then systems physiology became really important, and that linked to homeostasis, understanding the fact that the heart and lungs and kidneys interacted together to maintain homeostasis. And huge advancements in imaging techniques and computers allowed us to actually study dynamic living systems. So the dynamic physiological processing going on. This was paramount to advancing physiology understanding in this century. And at this time also became the idea of linking physiology with pharmacology and genetics, and linking them together to really understand, what causes disease, and then in terms of creating therapies and devices for improving health. And now we're going all the way to the 21st century, today's world. And now integrative molecular and whole body science is key. So we're understanding linking molecular data with whole body functions. And so you're bridging this whole detailed biology with a clinical outcome. So how something can go wrong in some little system and create a disease. This whole idea became really important in the development of precision medicine. So understanding how physiological individual variability, you can tailor treatments that are based on an individual's genetics and body function. So not everybody's going to respond to the same way to a treatment. And it's understanding the individual's genetics can help physicians and help scientists develop better therapies to treat an individual's disease. So medicine and biology became increasingly specialized. Physiology served this really unifying discipline, and this whole idea of informing all these other biomedical sciences, and then translating it into discovery and into improved human health. And so that takes us through a brief history of physiology. And now I'm going to talk about the importance of a Nobel Prize that is awarded with the name physiology in its title. And so, a lot of times people just call it, oh, this individual received the Nobel Prize in medicine. No, they received the Nobel Prize in physiology or medicine. Physiology is the first word in that award. And so it was the third prize that was designated by Alfred Nobel in his will in 1895. And it was defined as being given for the most important discovery within the domain of physiology or medicine. And it honors fundamental discoveries in that biological mechanism, so the physiology of something, and their practical applications in treating disease, so the medicine part of it. So keeping that name and keeping it alive in the name of this obviously extremely impactful award, the Nobel Prize, the term physiology preserves that scientific heritage while highlighting medicine's role in understanding the health principles. And so think about it this way. Physiology, we have to know what's normal. What are we expecting to see in a normal function? So physiology establishes what's the normal function of the human body. And then a disease is when something goes awry in that normal physiology, that normal function. And so you begin to recognize when you can see what's not normal, what causes it to be a disease. And then you can design treatments to treat that disease. So there's an individual, a 1968 Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine was given to an individual who was born in India. His name is Dr. Har Gobind Khorana. He was awarded the 1968 Nobel Prize and shared it with several other individuals. But his work was instrumental in understanding the genetic code and demonstrating how DNA nucleotides determine the amino acid sequences. And he was the first to chemically synthesize an artificial functional gene. So India should be proud of an individual who was born in India and made a major advancement in our understanding of the genetic code, which obviously is very informative to science today. And then so that was the only Nobel Prize given to an individual from India that I could find, the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine. But there are some other very notable concepts that originated in India. And so, for example, what's called the Tridosha Doctrine. And so this kind of reminds me a little bit of the idea of the four humors of, things that are really impacting our biology, our physiology. But this was an ancient traditional system of medicine in India. There were three fundamental energies in the body. There was air and space, fire, and earth and water. And this was like an early attempt to map how the body functions and how equilibrium can dictate health. So it kind of goes back to that whole idea of the four humors, and imbalance in those cause disease. And this is when these three energies go astray, don't follow normal pattern, then it leads to a disease. And then another important individual is considered Sushrata, who was considered the father of surgery, but he was one of the first to prescribe daily moderate exercise to enhance muscle strength, improve digestion, and actively prevent diseases such as obesity and diabetes. Well, I mean, this is truly, exercise physiology is a key. There's so many people that would benefit by following this old theory of Professor Sushrata, a father of surgery, the idea of the importance of exercise in creating a healthy individual. And then another individual, so some other individuals, the father of Indian physiology is Sir Jagadish Chandra Bose, and he revolutionized our understanding of how living tissues respond to stimuli. He was actually a plant physiologist, but he would actually, this whole idea of creating and seeing changes in the stem and in the root of the plant, but it leads to other types of stimuli leading to responses even in the nervous system. So he kind of revolutionized this idea of understanding a stimulus response connection. And then who's not today, he was critical for the discovery of cholera toxin. His work proved the mechanism of transmission of this cholera pathogen and leading to breakthroughs in our understanding of intestinal infections and therapies to treat such diseases. And then an individual who I remember reading about because of my interest in neural control of the cardiovascular system was Dr. Puntel, and he's a prominent medical scientist his work was on the pulmonary receptors and atrial receptors controlling circulatory function, and he was the first Indian physiologist to be elected to the Royal Academy of Science. Okay, so now, like I said, a key thing that I was going to talk about was this idea of the importance of physiology in medicine and biomedical sciences. And so getting you back to this picture again, which I've already discussed, this whole idea of thinking about physiology as being critical for all these other disciplines. If you don't understand physiology, you won't really appreciate all the other sciences that it informs. And so for example, we've got, whoops, went too fast there. Let me go back here. Okay. Sorry about that. So I'm going to talk about physiology as an integrative science. So physiology links molecular events to cellular responses, to tissue, to organ, and then whole body. So think about this as being a linear connection from the smallest, the molecule, to the whole cell, to a tissue, to organs, to multiple organs, and then whole body, and appreciating how all of these line up together to form integrative physiology. And then the importance of communication between different organs. So, our body couldn't function correctly if the cardiovascular, respiratory, renal, and nervous systems didn't communicate with each other. You need to constantly work these together. When something goes awry, then the other things come into feedback, like during exercise, how you'll have changes, metabolic demands make differences, but they come together. And this whole idea of the importance of this communication between different organs to be able to maintain homeostasis. And then obviously we can't talk about clinical importance without educating us on the biomedical functions and learning. We really understand disease by understanding what went wrong with normal physiology. And so specifically now, sort of a connection between the link between physiology and biochemistry. So we have biochemical pathways. So what does biochemistry do? Biochemistry identifies different molecules and reactions, things like glycolysis. It's important for understanding hormone synthesis, which is important for cellular function. And then take physiology. How does physiology interact with biochemistry? Well, physiology explains how and when a biochemical pathway activates something in the living organism. And so it's really what's important about biochemistry in our bodily function is how it impacts physiology. Hormonal regulation. So things like insulin and cortisol. They're characterized biochemically, but they're explained physiologically in order to understand how it can impact the entire body. So physiology interprets biochemical abnormalities and disease, and that will help guide pharmacological interventions. So we're even then beginning to talk about a connection between physiology, biochemistry, and pharmacology. And then let's see the next slide here. So, and then importance of the link between physiology and genetics. So genetics, the genes encode proteins like enzymes and ion channels that drive cellular and organ function. So physiology explains how genetic mutations can affect cell behavior and lead to some disease or some clinical symptom. And then physiology is kind of that link between genes and the environment that we often talk about. Yeah, there's a genetic component to this disease, but it's also informed by the environment. So physiology is actually the link between that gene environment connection. And so understanding the physiology is allowing us to understand how this gene and gene environment interaction can influence the development of disease under different conditions. And this is key to precision medicine application. So the whole idea of being able to develop treatments that are specific for an individual, because we understand their genetic composition, and then you can make better decisions to know then what are the best predicting things like risk and targeted treatments. And then pharmacology. So you can't understand pharmacology unless you understand physiology for sure. So I'm in a pharmacology department. I've never had a pharmacology course in my life. I just have to teach it. But I can only do that because I have fundamental training in physiology. So I can say, okay, these drugs are acting on physiology. And so I understand the physiology, so then I can learn the pharmacology as well. So drugs act, of course, by binding to receptors and enzymes and transporters and ion channels. And what do? They alter physiological function. And then, like the basis of very basic principle of pharmacology, pharmacokinetics. So understanding absorption, distribution, metabolism, and excretion. All four of those basic principles of pharmacokinetics, they depend upon physiology. They depend upon, the distribution. It depends upon the blood flow. If blood flow gets altered, the distribution gets altered. It depends upon organ function. If you can't metabolize, if the kidney's not working, if the liver's not working, it's not going to work. Excretion. If it's not going to work, if your bodily functions are impaired, then the pharmacokinetics are impaired. And so physiology becomes really important to understand how a drug is going to respond. And the variability of a drug responding depends upon the physiology. So even simple things, even normal things like age, pregnancy, and things like disease, because it alters physiology, it can alter the way a drug is going to respond. And so a physician may need to prescribe a different dose of a drug under different conditions. And then, of course, the whole idea of pathophysiology and therapeutic targeting. So drugs are used to restore normal physiological function during a disease. So it's trying to bring it back to normal physiology. So things like diuretics and beta blockers try to bring things back to normal in a patient that has heart failure. So this is a good example of how the importance of the connection between physiology and pharmacology. And then the term pathophysiology, it's even got the word physiology in its title. So of course it's going to be important. So what is pathophysiology? So it's altered physiology. It's disrupted physiology. So the concept of pathophysiology views illness as being altered physiological regulation. Not just this organ was damaged. It's the idea of what was altered because the organ was damaged. There was a change in its function. And that is the guiding principle for understanding pathophysiology. And then understanding how we can treat the individual because of a disruption, not so much a disruption in the physical construct of an organ, but in the function of that organ. So laboratory and clinical findings like hypoxemia, edema, it helps us understand the physiological imbalance that actually was the root cause of the disease that individual had. And then pathophysiology explains disease stages and compensatory responses, such as asymptomatic early hypertension evolving to deterioration. So capturing a change at an early stage, long before we get to the point where it almost becomes a fatal disorder. So it's understanding that connection between pathophysiology and normal physiology. And then really importance of thinking about physiology and clinical reasoning and diagnosis. And clearly, we think about the importance of understanding physiology for diagnosing a disease. So we think thinking physiologically helps the clinician understand how and why a particular symptom occurred and then say, okay, because this happened, then this individual must have disease A or B or C. You might differentiate it based on the differences in physiology. And so even taking something like the multiple causes of hypertension, there are so many different ways that hypertension can occur. And so understanding the physiology can help us maybe understand, does this individual have hypertension because their heart isn't functioning properly, because their vascular system isn't, because their kidneys aren't, or because they have an endocrine disorder? So all these different things can lead to the same outcome. They all lead to hypertension. So if you just measure blood pressure is up, then you won't understand what was the cause of that blood pressure to go up. So diving deeper into the physiology of individual organs. And then respiratory physiology and the relationship between respiratory physiology and acid-base balance. So understanding respiratory physiology helps us interpret arterial blood gases and acid-base disorders. And so, again, this whole link of really understanding that here's a disease process, but it's because of something went wrong with the physiology. But being able to identify the specific physiological changes that occurred helps in diagnosis. And rapid physiological assessment can actually help us, lead to things before they become really impossible to treat. And physiology is really the core of future medicine. So I brought up the concept of precision medicine several times, but this whole idea of linking molecular data with functional outcomes for precise treatment of really personalized medicine. So Michigan State University is in the process of hiring an individual who has created a digital twin of tumors in cancer. So identifying a tumor in an individual and then identifying all the different cell types that are in that tumor, creating them digitally in a dish, and then finding therapies that can be effective in treating that created digital twin tumor in a dish before trying it in the human individual. So this is like really taking it to the point of understanding that particular individual's tumor cells and creating medicine specifically to treat that individual. May not work in others, but might work in this individual. And, so many people in the world walk around with these wearable sensors. What are they doing? They're telling you about your physiology. So you've got a device on you. You can, my heart rate is this. It can measure my activity. It can even tell me about my sleep. Did I get a good night's sleep last night? It's not how I feel this morning, but it's what does my watch tell me about my sleep last night? We are constantly getting information about our physiology if you have these devices. I personally don't have them. The only thing I have is one that tells me how many steps and how many miles I walk in a day. So, but here's physiology on your watch. And then the concept of regenerative medicine and bioenergy. So replicating the physiological conditions like mechanical and electrical cues for this critical use of tissues and organ engineering. And systems biology integration. So system biology and computational models rely on understand these physiological framework and interpret complex biological data. So, really like putting things, all these different things that are occurring in 21st century physiological sciences, organ on a chip, all these things that are really advancing our understanding of physiology and pathophysiology and disease. But centerfold of that is the fact that we understand physiology better. So I'm pointing out that obviously understanding physiology is critical for health. It's critical for all these other biomedical sciences. But physiology educators face a lot of challenges these days. So I'm going to go through some of these challenges. And for example, so one of the things that I'll tell you about that I had a role in, but my colleague Jaysari Sangupta, who was a retired professor from All India University Medical Science of Institute of Medical Sciences in New Delhi, And she was chair of the IUPS Board of the General Assembly, and I was vice chair. And one of the requirements of this Board of the General Assembly is to, at the Congress, which is every 4 years, this group does a report on the current things that are challenges and the way forward in physiology was the title of this article. So it surveyed all the member societies of the IUPS, including the Physiological Society of India, of course, was involved in doing this. Send out a survey and ask a series of questions. And included in this report that we did was, what kind of challenges are physiology educators facing? And so what was very obvious as we collected this information globally, there's a lot of similarity across all the continents in which what physiology educators are facing these days. So things like, we need more educators with an in-depth knowledge of physiology and skilled in the ability to teach physiology. We have a lot of people that are asked to teach that really are not experts in teaching or experts in physiology. So we need to train the trainers. And then a lot of students lack sufficient background in things like chemistry and physics and anatomy to be able to really understand complex physiological concepts. You know, the farther we get into this world, then, there's more and more things that we have to cover in courses. There's more and more knowledge out there. And so we have to figure out what is the key kind of knowledge that a student needs to have to become a physiologist or to become a physician. And also, it's very clear that there are different ways that people learn. And so we need to make educational material available to people with different ways of learning. So we have visual learners and we have auditory learners. Some people just don't like listening to a lecture. They get distracted, they can't follow it, but they can read it in a textbook. Other ones would be far easier to listen to some audio things of information, and they pick it up that way. So you really have to figure out, be creative in making sure you make your material accessible to all different learning styles. And then an important difference that's really gaining steam is this whole idea of didactic lectures, just sitting in a classroom listening to somebody tell you something, or having you read some basic material, but then try to use that. So active learning, so the flipped classroom idea. This has become more and more, more and more individuals are trying to implement this approach. And some things like moving away from traditional physiology courses to having these blended multidisciplinary courses. I mean, so many places have gone to this, including at Michigan State. For medical students, there's not a physiology course. It's taught along with all the other biomedical sciences. And so there's not enough time dedicated to teaching and learning integrative physiology per se. And then there's also a limited number of dedicated physiology degree programs at the undergraduate and graduate levels. Inadequate standardization among undergraduate and graduate program courses. Need for more benchmarking of curriculum, the different learning outcomes, content, and milestones to be expected. How can, what is the least amount of material an individual needs to have, a least amount of competencies an individual needs to have to qualify to being called a physiologist? Evidence supports that active learning in physiology is actually better. The student learns it more practically than they do by just listening to a lecture or reading a textbook. But there's a lack of resource because it takes more people to be involved in teaching in an active learning strategy than in standing up in front of a classroom with 300 students or something. And so there's not enough institutional support to promote wide scale use of active learning strategies often. And then things like limited hands-on learning opportunities that enhance learning. When I grew up, there were physiology labs for every medical student went to a weekly session in a physiology lab. This doesn't occur anymore. So labs are expensive to set up and maintain and really requires a lot of dedication and specialized equipment that's not available. And then there's just inherent difficulties in bridging the gap between theoretical physiology and then the practical application of that in a clinical setting. And difficulty in designing assessments that measure critical thinking, problem solving, and applied knowledge rather than just than spitting back facts. And so, it's much easier to sort of give a multiple choice quiz than it is to really create really dynamic assessments. And so understanding that physiology education needs to adapt to include the new discoveries in technology, such as genomics, molecular biology, and computational biology. And again, we talk about not enough time to teaching the fundamentals, but we need to teach them in line with all of these other things as well. So all these challenges that, like I say, were basically global challenges. People from all across the world commented on these kinds of things in that report. But luckily, physiologists across the globe are developing opportunities to improve physiology education. They're not just going to stand there and say, okay, there's a problem, find me a solution. Instead, they're looking for that solution. They're trying to teach in order to solve it rather than sitting back and having somebody else figure out how to do it. So I'm going to take us through some things that have been done at various parts of the world to help with the idea of encouraging better physiology learning by better physiology education. And there's been the development of partnerships with relevant stakeholders and advocacy to attract more funding for physiology education. There's some developing mentorship and training programs to enhance physiology education. We're going to implement the use of core concepts of physiology, align curricular content with accreditation standards, developing common assessment procedures that actually begin to evaluate that critical thinking, problem solving, and applied knowledge, and improve and include professional skills training for those faculty and students that are involved in teaching. Don't just focus on we got to train the students. We also need to train the faculty to help them better train the students. And so, and science communication, the importance of doing that even in education, to be a good communicator. So I'm going to take you now through some of the things that I know there's far more than what I'm going to tell you about, but I'm going to tell you some that I've had some interaction with. So many of you, I'm sure, know Professor Cheng Wei Ming, who is from Malaysia. And in 2003, he came up with this idea of he wanted to excite students' interest in physiology. And so he created what's called the Inter-Medical School Physiology Quiz. And the very first time, there were just seven medical schools that participated in Malaysia. And this is, this year, it's in this 23rd year. And, hundreds of schools participate in these activities. And there's various versions of it. So as I said, he did this. He wanted the students to be interested in physiology and helping them become competitive in understanding it. And so students just being on a stage, answering questions orally, part of it being multiple choice kind of things, but the big part of it being this oral challenge of getting up and answering questions. And it really fostered collaboration and respect among the students and faculty. The students get really excited about it. I got to participate in the event. I think it was 2013. It was held in Indonesia that year. It was the first time Dr. Cheng took it outside of Malaysia, and since then it's gone all over the world. But since its initiation, this Intermedical School Physiology Quiz has inspired national physiology quizzes in multiple countries and amplifying its educational impact globally. After I did it in Indonesia, I developed a quiz, a similar type of format for a quiz associated with the Michigan Physiological Society's annual meeting, and I served as its quiz master. And this past May, I served as the quiz master for one of these quizzes. The first time they held it, the first time that the East African Society of Physiological Sciences created a quiz. We had 22 medical schools in East Africa participate, and it's great enthusiasm. The students get really excited, very competitive. It's very refreshing. So it shapes learning approaches, teaching, and clinical reasoning, and fosters collaboration and inclusiveness. It's a great opportunity. And another thing that has been done to encourage physiology education, and one of my dear friends, Erica Wehrwein, here, 4 faculty professors in various institutions across the United States, they got together and they organized a group that talk about physiology education. It's called the Physiology Majors Interest Group, PMIG. And it has become a global community. Faculty from across the world participate in this. They have an annual meeting. It's a community for undergraduate programs and program directors that promote the use of core concepts in physiology education. They publish and they continue to develop national curriculum guidelines, and they facilitate networking among faculty teaching and undergraduate physiology programs across the world. They provide all kinds of literature and stuff like that. And this PMIG program was instrumental in the American Physiological Society's development of a Center for Physiology Education. And so this has become a really popular physiology education resource. It nurtures and promotes excellence in teaching and learning physiology by cultivating a vibrant and inclusive community of physiology educators, fosters a shared vision of physiology education. It provides exceptional curricular, pedagogical, and career development resources. It supports equitable advancement of physiology educators, and it raises the profile of physiology as a discipline within academic and funding agencies. And so being a member of the American Physiological Society gives you access to all this material. And so the Center for Physiology Education aspires to model these approaches: evidence-based teaching in practices, and so incorporate data-driven teaching approaches to enhance student learning, inclusive teaching practices, so implementing curricular changes to enhance these inclusive teaching practices, teaching and learning integrative physiology, so not just organ by organ, but to how the organs interact with each other to really understand physiology, and expand the educator understanding of physiological core concepts, and physiology education research, and curriculum development, and focusing on the core concepts. And so this is a great advantage to being a member of the APS, is to have access for this huge amount of information that is constantly gets updated as well. And my friend Erica Wehrwein from Physiology, who was one of the faculty involved in PMIG, was also instrumental in being involved and serving as a chair of the Center for Physiology Education, and actually being on the committee that led to the development of this as well. And so now another thing, right here in India, the Indian Council of Medical Research workshop series that I was involved in from 2018 and 2019, and we were ready to do another one in 2020, and then COVID hit. So never happened. But so this was a great opportunity to really encourage the use of active learning strategies in medical physiology education. And it went through activities like flipped classrooms, case-based learning, problem-based learning, and to facilitate the exchange of knowledge about best practices in physiology teaching. Improve the quality of physiology teaching through creating networks and working groups of trained teachers of physiology in basic sciences, medicine, animal sciences, and dentistry. So it was a great opportunity. It was my 2 trips to India, which I truly had a great time being in India with as part of these programs. Oops, and let me go back to that. So the outcome of these workshops was some several articles published in Advances in Physiology Education, which is, many of you know, I'm sure, is through this is one of the journals of the American Physiological Society, which is a highly rated education journal. And then also an article published in the Indian Journal of Medical Research. So these were outcomes, so really, practical outcomes of these published outcomes, showing scholarship by running these workshops. And Africa, East Africa, various African universities got together for a physiology curriculum for African universities called Physiocafun. And so this is Professor Abdul Latif was sort of the leader of this. It was a committee of 15 physiologists from Africa, Europe, and the USA that drafted this Physiocafun. It was introduced at a meeting held in Tanzania in 2023, which I had an opportunity to attend this meeting as well. And it was this Physiocafun is a competency-based curriculum development guideline with 23 modules as a first step to address the shortcomings experienced in physiology education in Africa. It's available. It's a freely available resource to help universities in Africa draft their curriculum to meet these local needs and to benchmark and revise the current curriculum. And I told you I was a quiz master at an event in East Africa in May, and they focused on this Physiocafun and getting medical schools in East Africa to follow this Physiocafun for better competency-based curriculum development. And so this has the first 15 modules cover various organ systems, and including principles and concepts of physiology, so cellular and integrative aspects of physiological sciences. And then the modules 16 through 23 are more optional for environmental physiology, pharmacology, biostats, and research methodology, seminars, and current topics in physiology. And this article about Physiocafun is also published in the American Journal of Physiology's Advances in Physiology Education journal. And then another thing is that we gotta mentor the faculty as well. And so when I was the first vice president of the IUPS, I was involved in developing a mentoring program for early career physiology educators in Africa. And we identified 19 mentees from various parts of Africa. And each mentee was assigned with 2 experienced physiology educators across the globe. And you can see they come from a wide area. And one of the things I managed to do was I got APS to provide each of the 19 mentees with a 2-year complimentary membership in the society, which provides them access to all those resources in the Center for Physiology Education. And so this was a great opportunity. So the whole goal of this mentoring program is for these young physiology educators to learn new methods in physiology education, to learn new skills and knowledge, and to facilitate the learning of physiology and areas of general academic writing. So even maybe getting access to helping people write grants for either education or research, and giving scientific presentations and writing for publications, and career advancement and increased scholarly confidence. Several of the mentees in this program attended the IUPS meeting in Germany last year, so I had an opportunity to meet in person some of the mentees in this program. So it's really been fun. And the American Physiological Society has this new campaign, and it's called Why Physiology Matters: The Science Driving Human Health Forward. Fight for Physiology. And it's a campaign really designed to secure funding and raise awareness for physiological research, and defined as the science of driving human health. So this is research oriented, but obviously it also helps education then too. So currently in the United States, severe reduction in research funding that is jeopardizing the discovery pipeline and getting future medical breakthroughs in. This is not unique to America, but it was certainly something that was not expected to occur in such fashion and with such drastic outcomes. So this campaign by the American Physiological Society is trying to protect scientific momentum, supports areas like cardiovascular health, metabolism, and specialized research on topics like women's health. And so it's called fightforphysiology.org. And science, so physiology, the science life depends on. And the individual who was president of the APS during this time, Robert Hester, I really like this quote: "Physiology is an essential modern driver of biomedical innovation. It's time to reintroduce this field to the world, not as the science of the past, but as the science our future depends on." And so my final slide here is some key takeaways for students and future researchers and educators. So remember to integrate physiology. It links molecular mechanisms to overall health and impact population-wide outcomes. Success in physiology research and teaching depends on perseverance, collaboration, and sharing knowledge. And so our goals are really to attain academic excellence, international cooperation, and ongoing educational innovation as the real foundation of medicine. And with that, I am done with my presentation.
Oh, what an excellent talk, Professor Suzanne.
Thank you.
And really, we enjoyed the whole talk. Without wasting time, I should just say we have a few questions. And there are some direct questions as well. Professor Shormishta Ghosh, what she says that the main challenge in medical schools is perhaps the duration that physiology is being taught in the first year without telling the students the importance of the subject throughout the course. Of course, very true, Shormishta Di. And again, she also says that she has some direct questions as well. Where she says that co-creation of learning content or active teaching or peer challenging is near peer teaching is very few. So other than what Shormishta says, we have Dr. Shomendu Dorbar also, who asks a direct question to you, that what is the new future opportunity of the students after completion of MSc Physiology degree. So here in our country, we do have undergraduate as well as the postgraduate teaching in human physiology, and I think that's what Professor Dr. Darbar wants to know, that what would be the future of the students passing out MSc in human physiology.
Yeah. So these are all good questions, and so I'll start a little bit backwards here. So after completing a master's of science in physiology, I mean, you should be able to try to use your knowledge to teach the next generation of physiologists too. To get a teaching job, go to try to get a teaching activity at a medical school in your location. Doing something to share your knowledge that you learned through your education with others, so you can spread the word about the importance of physiology. And Sarmi's questions are very good, and I agree completely.
Actually, Shormishta, she has just commented on your lecture.
Okay.
So these are her comments, right? What she,
yeah.
Even she's a physiologist, right? And she has
I know Sarmi. I met Sarmi when I came to do the physiology. Yes, just your ideas. Yes. So Sarmi, I met Sarmi, and she excited. I I love her enthusiasm for physiology and for physiology teaching. Yes, so I met her in 2018 with the India workshops.
Okay, we have another question from Dr. Labunna Mundul. What she say, Labunna Mundul, what
Yeah.
she says that what are the alternatives to animal experimentations? Of course, this is a question that we know physiology is where experimental physiology is taught, and
Right.
you require animals for those practicals or those experimentations. So
Yeah.
what would be those alternatives?
Yeah.
Because without experimental physiology we cannot think of physiology.
One of the things that has been done nowadays is getting access to some computerized programs and stuff that in models and having these, but I mean, they all cost money, but it's rare to have a laboratory for a medical student now that would involve an animal. So they end up having to have, so like I know at Michigan State University, there's some mannequins that you can actually feed a drug into them and they get a response, but it's a computer. So it's doing it so you can see it live in not a person, but in some, fake person. And so there's a lot of computer though uses of modeling of things that can benefit. I wish it was back. I mean, I certainly will never forget the first time that for the medical school, when I was in graduate school as a physiology pre-doctoral student. I was in a laboratory with medical students teaching them physiology and cardiac physiology. When you opened up the heart and you fibrillated a heart and the feel of that fibrillating heart, and I could still think about it as and the idea of the bag of worms. Well, when you read it in a textbook, when it says the heart feels like a bag of worms, it means nothing. But when you put your hand on that fibrillating heart, you feel that bag of worms. So it's like bringing the words in a textbook into reality is it's so much more meaningful, so much more impressionable, and you'll never forget it. I mean, there's so many things that happened and learning, like, just the whole idea of how use of animals in research. There's such a call for people to stop using animals in research, including in the United States, all these people saying you can't use animals. Well, if you don't use animals, you're not going to understand. If you don't start out with that, you're not going to learn anything, because you can't do all these things in a human to begin with. And, it's sad.
Yeah. Animal experimentations are what I feel, Professor Suzanne, that animal experimentations are, of course, a part of human physiology, because you cannot do experimentations on human beings.
Right.
So, of course, and animal experimentations cannot replace any other experimentations,
Right.
even in the biophysical field or the biochemical field.
Yeah. And so, the United States is real big on this thing that are called, it's called NAMS, but it's new analytical methodologies. And it's like trying to get away, but you're not going to, their aim is to say, we're going to get away completely from using animals. But everybody who really knows what they're talking about says we'll never get away, but it's minimizing and learning better ways of doing experimentations without impacting the animal's health. So like doing things and learning more just humanity.
Yeah.
I'm chair of our institutional animal care and use committee. And so, big thing of, minimizing pain and distress on animals is important.
Yes, that's for sure. So, okay, so I have been, we come to the fag end of this lecture, Professor Suzanne. Thank you once again very much for this wonderful lecture. It has been starting from the history of physiology to how to teach human physiology, and how physiology has been correlating physics, chemistry, and the whole of the things going on. And of course, without knowing physiology, you cannot go anywhere. You
That's
need
right.
to know. Yes. So I have been bestowed of just giving the vote of thanks. So at the first, I thank you, Professor Suzanne Barman, that for this exciting talk. I'd like to thank all the dignitaries or the post holders of Physiological Society of India who have taken the initiative to celebrate the week-long PSI Foundation Week with some very, very exciting lectures. And one of those exciting lectures is that of yours, Professor Suzanne. And then I would like to thank our President of PSI, Professor Proshan Nayok, Secretary of PSI, Professor Rajan Haldar, our Treasurer, Dr. Sriti Ratan Tripathi, and all the members of Physiological Society of India who have made this event a grand success.
Well, I
Thank you,
appreciate
Professor
being
Barman.
invited. I appreciate being invited. I thank you very much.
Okay, we end up
Okay.
the
Thank you.
meeting. Okay, yeah.
Thank you very much. See you.
See you.